So this is the 5th video for the Unit 4 playlist over metallic bonds. So a metallic bond is a bond between two metallic atoms where valence electrons are allowed to move freely. So this is different from the bonds that we have talked about before, which is ionic and covalent. So remember, an ionic bond is whenever you have an exchange of electrons, and then a covalent bond is where you are sharing a pair of electrons. So in these bonds, these electrons do not move. You have that bond that is a permanent fixture in between the two atoms, and so a metallic bond is very special in that the atoms allow the electrons to move around. So this is going to contribute to properties of metals that you guys are already familiar with. So some properties of metals that you guys are already familiar with. Metals are very good conductors of heat and electricity, meaning they hold on to heat and they allow electricity to go through them. Something you need to make a note of: electricity is essentially just moving electrons, and heat is essentially particles that are moving very quickly. So metals are good conductors because they have moving valence electrons, which is essentially electricity and essentially heat. So this is what makes them good conductors of heat and electricity. Those moving valence electrons are very important. Other properties of metals: they are malleable and ductile, meaning they're able to be bent and drawn into a wire. And again, this is due to those moving valence electrons, so it allows a lot of movement of the atoms, but the atoms are still able to stay together. And then the very last property is that metals all tend to be shiny. They are all silver except for copper and gold. So just make note of those properties, and let's talk more about how those bonds work. So metallic bonds are actually held together because of those moving valence electrons. So what we have here are copper atoms, and I drew a positive sign next to each one to signify that a copper atom contains a positively charged nucleus due to those protons. Now, these valence electrons are moving around, and because of this, sometimes you'll have an end of the metal that has a very high number of valence electrons just by chance. When you have a high number of electrons, it's going to tend to be a more negatively charged end, and then the other side is going to be deprived of that negative charge and be a little bit more positive. Now, as we know, positives and negatives are attracted to one another, and so this is actually how metals are held together even though the electrons are able to move around. It causes that charge separation, that positive and negative, and hence that creates a bond that is held together by the positive and negative attraction.